80% of South Africa's grade 4 learners cannot read for meaning. The 2021 Progress in International Reading Literacy study revealed this week what is being called a generational catastrophe. Current pupils are at least a year behind in learning when compared to their 2016 counterparts. Added to this, South Africa experienced the largest decline in reading in outcomes of all countries profiled. So, how do we improve our children's early reading ability and avert a crisis? For more, we're joined by Dr. Anthea Cereseto, who is the CEO of the Governing Body Foundation. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon, Doc. And it's some very worrying developments that you and I will be discussing this hour. And perhaps just give us a sense of why we are seeing such a lagging behind by our learners compared to others in which they were compared to on a global scale.
Right. Good afternoon to you and to the viewers. It's a complicated matter. South Africa has always said this, that we have a unique education context. And one of our education researchers, analysts of data, has said we should look to Brazil and see how they've managed to bring about changes and why a similar income level country has managed to make better progress than we have. So I think that was not a bad idea to start looking at similar countries and then seeing, well, what's the difference? The data that we've got in this report is aggregated data, and we need to go into it in more detail and go and look at the fine details where we have in fact had some educational improvement strategies. Have we actually noticed an improvement? And then learn from those best practices. So I do think we have to take things in small bites. But I think if I could go to the big question, I do think that we need to focus better. And we have a number of recommendations coming out of the report about what South Africa should do. That's from the report. Mm-hmm. It's also sorry?
No, please continue.
It's also fairly obvious, both from ordinary observations and from these results, that our education context cannot be isolated from the rest of our social context. And there we have enormous difficulties. The results have shown that readers who did the test in English and Afrikaans didn't decline to the extent that the readers in the other African languages did decline. And we need to say, well, why? And so it is actually shown that the socio-economic disparities in the country are reflected in the education outcomes. So we can't separate education from the rest of what's going on in our country. And that is the major issues such as poverty, unemployment. Those things have an impact on children's ability to learn. Children can learn once their basic needs are taken care of. So we need to deal with the basics first, such as food and shelter, safety in their environments, their family. Do they have family, or are they all living with carers who are caring for them to well or not so well? And then their own confidence. And we rated our learners very low in confidence in reading. That was a demonstration of what else is going on in society. So only once we've dealt with the basics can children start to pursue cognitive needs. In other words, the thinking, what is needed to get the brain going to do the actual reading, learning to read so that one day they can, in fact, read to learn. And only then will they start pushing to reach their potential. So until we get the basics in our society right for all our children, we're struggling. That's number one. Then if we could just take from the recommendations, we need, and I think everybody's saying this, targeted professional development of teachers so that we have specialized teachers who do really know how to teach reading, basic literacy, and then moving on to the more complex aspects of literacy, which are in this test. The test tests quite difficult things. They don't only test sort of the low-level skills, they actually test quite difficult things, which I think even some university students might struggle with. So there's a range of things in the test. So we need to get teachers specialized in their area that they have to teach their children. The report also said that we don't give enough curriculum time to reading, and teachers have been saying this. Our curriculum, especially in early grades, is overcrowded. They don't have enough time to consolidate what is necessary. Now, that also was revealed because our grade 6s managed to do better. So it did show that with time and moving on and up through grade 5 and grade 6, and with time, they were able to read better. Not wonderfully. I think we moved from 81% to something like 57%. So it wasn't marvelous. We're still at the low benchmark, but it did help. So if we have more time in the curriculum for actually working on reading, that will help. That's a recommendation which I think all the teachers teaching will agree with. And then they also pointed to resources. Now, people always blame funding and resources for our failures, and there are points at which that is true. And that is for all learners of all the language groups to have access to readers, and interesting readers and relevant readers. And so with the African languages, we need indigenous reading books of what they call graded readers, so that we have books that children can start with, but in all languages. So that's what the report said. Then I would like to go a little bit further and say, because it's a societal issue, it's families and communities that support. And children can learn to read better when in their early days, before school, they've had pre-literacy exposure. And that's quite simple, but I can't really go into it in tonight's program. I don't think you have time to hear it all, but we call it, pre-literacy. That's developing language, vocabulary, conversation. Can you tell a story that goes in a logical order? Can you hold a book? Can you turn the page in our languages, the way we read, left to right, and we turn our pages in the particular direction? All of those things are pre-literacy. Sounds, rhymes, little songs, those help. More exposure to that in the families. Another matter is modeling reading. So for families to read together, to read aloud, to have children sitting on mothers, grannies, grandpas, dads' laps and looking at picture books and reading and starting to enjoy exposure to print and understanding that print words actually convey messages. So those are important at home. Also values. Now, here we had another problem. If we compared ourselves with Brazil, where the strategies Brazil used, we can talk about in a moment. But one of the differences between Brazil's results and our results, when you looked at some of the detail, was their discipline at school. Now, in South Africa, we had 30% of respondents saying that discipline wasn't an issue, but 70% said that discipline was an issue, with 15% in South Africa saying that it was moderate to severe hindrance to progress in reading.
Yeah, Doc, I'm going to come in there because you've mentioned a couple of important points. And unfortunately, the situation in South Africa is such that the socioeconomic circumstances for many families is not going to change anytime soon. The power cuts have cost jobs, the lack of economic growth, and a lot of stress and anxiety in many communities. So one wonders, as you describe the outcomes of this particular report and the recommendations, What are the consequences for the future of South Africa's economy if we are putting children through school and letting them move through to the different grades and levels without them being able to read for comprehension? Surely the necessary skills and the workforce of the future is at great risk here, and something's going to need to be done immediately, if you will.
Yes. So schools do take up this burden. Let's call it that. They do take it up, and they must, because if it's not being supported elsewhere in society, it is the burden of schools. It's it's their job to do it. So we have to do it better within the restraints that we have, because it's a vicious cycle, as you point out. If we don't end up with people progressing with the necessary skills, we end up with people completing school but actually not having enough skills. So we need to get our children through the basic education with good results. Then as we move to the higher grades, we must maybe be more urgent in our dealing with the older learners and appropriately educating them where their skills and interests lie. So for some children, it might be the academic stream going on to university, to the higher level studies. For other children, it could be in various skills that our country desperately needs, because we do have a lot of people who have no jobs. There are employers who are saying they can't find the people with skills that match. So we need to work much better at producing in the education system people with skills that match the needs. Obviously, our economy is in a bad state with declining job opportunities because of lack of investment or whatever. But let's focus on education. Let's do what we can do. So I would appeal to the education department, both national and provincial, to focus. Let's focus so that we spend these first 4 years, grade R to grade 3, making sure that the basics are done properly. That's training properly, funding appropriately, not sending the funds to things that are not necessarily delivering what we need from those first 4 years of schooling. Time at school must be used to the maximum advantage. So let's work out what's absolutely necessary. Not that we should cut out music or creative arts and things like that, because that's not healthy either, or physical activity. But we need the time to focus on reading. And then we need the political will, both at politician level and at the operational level in heads of department and going right through the provinces to push it. And accountability. I do need to stress accountability, but appropriate accountability. Not just somebody coming with a list and ticking, have certain things been done, but the support that's necessary for the teachers combined with holding them to account for delivering, but not the chasing of lists. Have you done this? Have you done this? Have you done that? Yep. And the teacher will have to tick, but the children might not yet have learned properly.
Thank you very much for those insights. That is the CEO of the Governing Body Foundation, Dr. Anthea Cereseto, joining us this afternoon. Very worrying trend in South Africa, the inability of children between grades R and 4 being unable to read for comprehension.